You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
Hello, I want to ask you a few questions. Like, why don't Black people ever talk about Black on Black crime? Or why don't Black people try to stop that violent rap music? Or why don't Black people ever comply? Or why don't Black people value education? Well, I think I have the answers. So I want to welcome you to theGrio Daily, the only podcast that'll tell you why Black people don't do things. Yeah, I'm sure you heard that phrase before, like, whenever you start talking about racial disparities, inequality, racism, white supremacy, there'll always be a what about? Like, but what about Chicago? Or, but what about the gangbangers? What about violence? It's always a but what about. But one of my favorites but what abouts is people who ask, why don't Black people ever ... They think they know what Black people do, and they wonder why Black people don't do certain things. Like, why don't Black people value education? Now, you got to forget about the fact that Black people so valued education, for instance, that white people had to pass laws during slavery to stop Black people from learning. You got to forget about the fact that Black people valued education so much that they let white people spit on their kids to desegregate their schools. You got to forget about the fact that we risked our lives to go to school. You got to forget about the fact that we built our own colleges separate from white colleges during segregation. You got to forget about the fact that there's never been a nanosecond in the history of this country where schools were equal, so we can't know if Black people value schools when we've never had equal schools. But the reality is, why don't Black people value education? Well, it's possible that the people who ask that question don't know all those things that I just told you. They don't know about segregation, like they're making that illegal in schools. We have documentary evidence that most white people don't know the particulars about slavery. Most white people think that slavery was eliminated by the Emancipation Proclamation or by Abraham Lincoln. Most white people don't know about the history of redlining. They don't know that white schools are funded at about $1,500 per student more than majority Black schools. White people really don't know these things. And the reason they wonder why Black people don't value education is because they don't know things. And it's the same is true for other things. Like when they think about violence or police brutality, they wonder why Black people don't comply. Well, the fact is that like most Black people who comply with the police still get stopped, frisked, searched more often than the white people who comply with the police. The reality is that white people are more likely to be found with contraband, even though Black people are more likely to be searched. The reality is that an unarmed Black person is more likely to be shot than an armed white person. The reality is that every segment of the way we police in America has racial disparities. So when they wonder why Black people don't comply, it's because we know these facts and they don't. We know that complying won't stop you from getting shot. We know that not having a gun on you won't stop you from being killed by the police. We know that acting within the constraints of the law won't stop you from getting stopped, frisked, a ticket, searched, and even investigated by the police. White people don't know that. So the reason they wonder why Black people don't comply is because they are less informed than the Black people who are targeted by police. Or, for instance, if you wonder why Black people don't talk about Black on Black crime. Well, of course, Black people know that you can't go to church, to the barbershop, to Thanksgiving dinner without hearing somebody talk about these dudes in the streets killing each other. These Black boys need to stop all this mess. But when you hear those things, white people ain't around. When the last time you seen some white person in the hood just trying to do a poll to see what Black people think about Black on Black crime or violence in general? They don't understand that Black people are actually fighting crime in the ways that make sense. Not locking people up, but pushing for gun control legislation. Black people are pushing for equal pay because we know that poverty is a large contributor to crime. We want equal schools because we know that education is the biggest deterrent to crime. We know that housing, employment, and economic opportunities are the largest factor in crime rates. Not whether 20 or 30 police are patrolling your neighborhood, not whether the cops are good or have 6 weeks training versus 8 weeks training. No, none of that stops crime. The only thing that stops crime are the things that Black people are fighting for. So when someone asks you why Black people don't talk about Black on Black crime, it's because we're doing something about it. We are more likely to contribute to social charities, to non-religious, nonprofit organizations, to the charities that affect our communities. We give a larger percentage of our income than any other demographic in America to charity. But if you don't know that, if you're dumb, you'd ask why Black people don't talk about Black on Black crime. The reality is there's a reason why Black people don't do the things that, quote unquote, Black people need to do. It's because white people are dumb. And we know that. We know that we don't have to virtue signal to white people every time we have a Stop the Violence march, which, by the way, outnumber Black Lives Matter and police brutality marches at about a rate of 4-to-1, depending on which city you're in. We know that calling the police don't stop crime. We know that the data says that education is a deterrent to crime. We know for a fact that the schools that we attend, 60% of Black kids attend schools that are majority Black, are underfunded. We know that despite all of that, Black children still attend school. We still attend college. Black women are the most educated demographic in this country. So we know what Black people need to do, and we do it. And if someone asks you why Black people don't do it, you should ask them why they don't subscribe to the theGrio Daily Podcast, why they don't tell their friends about it, why they don't download that theGrio app. And you should ask them the question that Black people have been asking each other since the beginning of time. Why don't white people ever shut up? We'll see you next time on the theGrio Daily. If you like what you heard, please give us a 5-star review, download the theGrio app, subscribe to the show, and share it with everyone you know. Please email all questions, suggestions, and compliments to podcast@thegrio.com.
You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
The 80s gave us unforgettable songs from Bob Marley, De La Soul, and Public Enemy.
I'm a black man, and I can never be a veteran.
Being Black the 80s is a podcast docuseries hosted by me, Torre, looking at the most important issues of the 80s through the songs of the decade.
Can I have another hit? The dope man said, "Look, I don't give a."
A decade when crack kingpins controlled the streets, but lost their humanity.
You couldn't be like no soft, smiling, happy-go-lucky drug dealer. You had to suppress that.
It was a time when disco was part of gay liberation.
It provided the information to counter narratives that were given to gay people by the straight world.
This is the funkiest history class you'll ever take. Join me, Torre, for Being Black the 80s on the theGrio Black Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts.